everybody, welcome to July's Cervello Inner Circle. Hope you're all doing well. As per usual, I'm your host, Chris Dames, and hopefully we'll guide each other through the case study and add a bit of value to these clients' lives if we were helping them. For the individuals who haven't been involved in the Inner Circle before, and the guys and girls who watch on LinkedIn, because I know a few of you do, Inner Circle is all about professionals collaborating, working together, sitting around a case study and looking at, from their particular professional perspective, how they might add value. First, we'll do some introductions around the room so we know who's around the room so we can help each other. But I want to just ask an additional question as we're doing introductions. Weirdly, the last week has resulted in us taking on 3 new accountants as financial planning clients. And one of the interesting things that we sort of tackled with today, funny enough, when I saw the third client who's coming on board, third accountant who's coming on board as a client, is that assumption that just because you're good at one particular part of finance, for example, you're good at all of it. And the accountant in question said to me, well, actually, Chris, I spend my day in audit or corporate tax or whatever it may be. I really need help getting focused on my personal financial side. So from your particular professional perspective, what I'd be interested to know is what assumptions do your clients make about what they're good at that you actually sometimes fill that gap? And we'll start with Alex, please. So who you are, where you're from, what your speciality is, and what's the big assumption that clients make when they're talking to you?
So afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. If not, I will certainly shout a bit louder. Alex Pearce from Kinney Talford Solicitors. I am an employment lawyer, so I act for both employers and employees. I deal with both contentious and non-contentious matters. I've been doing this for 10 plus years now. It keeps me busy and out of trouble, I have to say. In terms of, I guess, assumptions that clients make, that I know everything off the tip of my tongue, for example. Unfortunately, a walking sort of encyclopedia. I can't quote sort of 500 cases in sort of 60 seconds. Or the fact that because I'm a solicitor, I must also do family law, bits and pieces. So obviously, I have colleagues that can sort of deal with those areas. So I think that's probably me in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, that assumption that you need to have all the facts at your fingertips, when in reality, in modern times, looking it up is just as easy, is an interesting one, isn't it?
I think things are never as sort of black and white as they may seem.
Yeah. And
you always want to sort of, like say, sometimes take some time to reflect on matters. Do a search to see if there's any other sort of additional cases that one could rely on, because that may well swing the pendulum from a sort of 50-50 case to a 60-40 case or 70-30 case.
I think you make a fair point there about sort of just taking some time to reflect as well, because sometimes the immediate answer isn't the right one, is it? You know, you want to make sure that you're thinking about what you're doing. So thanks, Alex, really appreciate that. Raymond.
Hi, Raymond Holt, Agnetis Partners. I work with small business owners to build their businesses with their families. So being a finance director coach, I look to bring facts and feelings to the conversation and balance the two. So I think one of the things about being a finance director, Chris, is every bit like accountants, everyone thinks you know everything about finance, which is not the case, and especially around compliance and terms and drafting terms for clients. I have a commercial background rather than a compliance background, but everyone thinks that compliance must know compliance. I know good compliance, but I'm not expert. Not even close.
And they are two completely different skill sets, aren't they? I'm not a compliance guy, I'm a relationships guy, and I think sometimes you're in a position where people assume that you've got to be sort of broad, and I don't think you have. Okay, well, that's a good assumption. So I'm assuming that this is quite a strong case study for you then, Raymond, yeah?
Well, I looked at it about this morning and thought, how much is in here?
Well, the problem is I had to get my 80s reference in as well. So I had to write a bit extra just so I could get some of those quotes.
Some of them I recognise, and some
Okay.
of them I was had me Google open this morning again. That sounds like, yeah, that must be one as well.
You know what? I'm just sorry. I mean, you should be actually working for clients. So I'm wasting my time Googling 80s references. I do apologise. Katie, tell everybody a little bit about you.
So my name's Katie Osborne and I'm a HR consultant. The company is called Focus on the Balance. I've got a couple of different areas, partnering small to sort of mid-sized businesses as they grow and developing that kind of HR relationship with them and hopefully help them along their way. Mid-sized businesses with their kind of strategic wellbeing focus and initiatives and so forth. And then occasionally I take on individual clients for sort of support and coaching, etc. I think there's going to be a common theme here with regards to the challenges. I think I also get asked 101 different questions that I don't always necessarily know the answer to at my fingertips. I also enjoy reflecting as well, because I think sometimes you can have your gut instinct, which is 90% correct most of the time, but especially in HR, given the last year, you know, things are changing day in, day out, and it's just constant, you know, checking and making sure that the advice you're giving is 100% accurate and the government hasn't changed something overnight that you haven't quite caught up on yet. So having that element of checking these things and then getting back to somebody with a full answer is better.
And it must be quite a challenging environment to work in, same as Alex, really, where the rules shift the sands of what you can advise and what you can't. I mean, how do you cope with that?
Yeah, well, I think, as I say, taking sort of a brief and working with an individual to an extent, you get to know them, you get to work with them, so you can be open and honest with things like that. Yeah. And always say that, you know, the best advice is being given a little bit of time to sort of go away and think about it, even if that is only half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour if they're on a real time limit, versus, you know, a day or two to really reflect on something and ensure you're getting back with the right, you know, the right information. There's very few things that are so time critical that you really have to give an answer within like 33 seconds, otherwise the world is going to explode, you know. So
I suppose the other thing as well with that, particularly when, you know, there's contentious stuff going on in small businesses, giving the employer, the business owner, the opportunity to take a step back from potentially making a mistake might be a good move, right?
Yeah, I mean, keeping somebody calm. I mean, I've got a classic example now. I've got a client chasing me, they've just received something. And I'm like, we can take our time responding, because actually you thinking about all the avenues and all the options and me advising you accordingly means that we'll come back probably with a much better, you know, response rather than immediate and urgent reaction that doesn't take anything into account, and also comes across that way, which isn't good. You know, all approaches should be as thoughtful as possible.
I was saying, I think I was saying this to you last week, Sharon. One of the things that we spent a lot of time during lockdown 1 doing is just keeping people calm. And helping them understand that their longer term strategic financial plan, you know, if that's another 5, 10, 20 years, isn't, you know, what happens today may not have a necessary impact on that, and just making sure they don't make short-term mistakes. And it's the same in your space, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Kate. Really appreciate that. Kevin, how are you, mate?
I'm very well indeed, mate. I'm calling you from Sheffield. I'm north, mate. Been up there twice now, second home daughter has, and I thought, right, I'll work out in conservatory today, not a problem. But 30 degrees in Sheffield, I'm hitting 2 days and 3 days, so in a lounge, so I apologise a little bit later. I'm very well. Kevin Hold Later Life Lending Solutions. We are specialists in later life lending. I've been now doing it over 24 years. We specialise in purely lifetime mortgage, which aren't interest only. People always talk to us about mortgages. My view is always, sorry, no qualified, but I don't do mortgages. We always refer across. That's our biggest error, that people don't understand your specialism. But no, we're doing well. We're happy on that side.
And how's Sheffield at the minute? So did you say your daughter was up there?
Yeah, it's my daughter. She's got, we've got some property up here. She now is technically renting from us. They're both gone through Sheffield University. And it's a nice area. It's great. Yeah. It's reasonable food, good food. You go out, nice areas, down to earth. We're only up here for 2 ends today, but we ain't going for a long weekend, Chris. You're a young man, so you won't appreciate this, but nice to extend it Friday to Monday now and then rush them out on a Sunday night.
Yeah, I will save that to when the kids ain't going to school, Kev. I think I'll get them in the end, but I'll save it to when the kids ain't going to school. Thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Mate. Anna Lee, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Are you in somewhere glamorous like Sheffield?
Oh, it's glamorous.
Even more so, Thurrock.
No, similar.
Exactly.
More shops.
Tell us a bit about you.
All right, so I'm a solicitor at Palmer Solicitors. I qualified last year and joined this particular company in June 2021. I specialise in all sort of matters of private client work, so wills, probate, powers of attorney, that sort of thing. Much the same with everybody else, the assumption that clients make, you must, as a solicitor, you know everything, obviously. But the one that really sort of, that gets to me, and it's something that I've had the last probably couple of weeks, a lot of, people come in for a one-off consultation with paperwork drafted elsewhere, and they want to know exactly what it says. And of course, all you can do is my interpretation. No. Does it say this?
Yeah.
This is my interpretation. Like, well, you must be able to tell me exactly what this says. It's like, well, I can from our perspective, but you know, they think that you come to us solicitors and we know all, and this is exactly right, and we could never be wrong.
You know, one of the other things that like sort of we get a bit is people expecting to give away hours of our time for free as well.
Oh yeah.
So you know, I'm always happy to give somebody a bit of time to understand where they are and understand how we might be able to help. But we're all trained and studied and to give professional advice for a fee, aren't we? You know, that's exactly the reality of it. So like, can you just check what I've done is right? Like, knowing that the liability is on you is not a game that I'd play in my business. I'm sorry.
No, when it comes to that, I have had people that have bought things like powers of attorney. Oh, can you check I've done this right? I'm like, no, I can do it for you and I can do it right. Yeah. But I can't check that you've done it right.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think just, you know, I think that's sometimes where the gap is, isn't it? You know, just like, that's not our job. Our job is to make sure that you're doing the right thing, but at a price that reflects our
the time and expertise, isn't it?
Yeah, the hours that we put in, making sure that it is right. But yeah, thanks, Annalie. Really appreciate that. Paul, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Chris. You too, I hope.
Good. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Very good.
Having a good week so far.
Very good.
Tell everybody a little bit about you and what you do.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Paul Valsden. My company is Corporate Counsel. We help businesses to grow, and eventually, if they want to, we help business owners exit their business. And it's a slightly different approach. We actually go in on a sort of interim basis or fractional basis, as it's described these days, to actually make things happen. So we agree a plan, get the strategy right, and then go in and make it happen. I think the biggest assumption that clients make is because, we haven't worked in my business before or haven't done lots of it, so you don't know anything about it. And of course, the reality is that most businesses, I mean, the business issues, forget about the technical issues, the business issues are the same, and it's how you look at it and how. So I generally have a few early meetings sort of setting that issue to rights, but otherwise very good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting that my business is unique when a lot of the challenges are. I think that to a certain extent is probably a personal thing, isn't it? Because if you've built and grown a business, you want to be as unique as you can. But the reality is some of the issues are ongoing, and you've probably seen.
That's right, and people, when they've built up a business, it is very personal, isn't it? So they feel, and they're the only ones who can do it. So there's that, and also, well, nobody else can do this apart from me. Well, then fine, you'll carry on until you're 125 or drop dead.
Which is part of the challenge we've got with these case studies. I'm sure that we'll be talking about that a little bit later. All right,
Absolutely.
thanks. Oh, Alison, how are you? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Really well. Now we've got Sheffield, we've got Thurrock. Where are you calling us from? Because it looks, I mean, it might be Sheffield. I've never been to a beach in Sheffield that looks like that. But where are you calling us from?
I'm actually calling from Southend-on-Sea. I wish I could
South
say
End
that it
like
looked
that
as lovely as my background, but actually the background is in honor of my mother-in-law, who's just arrived from St. Lucia.
Oh, very nice, very nice, good stuff. St. Lucia, that's all good. You know what, we're probably getting St. Lucia weather today, but I just need a beach like that to sit on and a gin and tonic, to be honest. But yeah, all good. So tell everybody a little bit about you and your business.
Hi everybody, I'm Alison Charles. My current business name is actually Alison Charles Limited Wellbeing in the Workplace, but that is probably going to transition in the next month or so to a company called Real Resilience. We're going to be doing the same thing. So essentially what I do is I work with both individuals and businesses to build real resilience to stress in this very stressful modern time that we deal with. So working with business individuals to actually help them overcome stress and get balance back in their life, but also looking at what stresses out the people in the office as well. So working with the company to actually put wellbeing programs in place, wellbeing strategies, but also providing training for their staff too.
Amazing, thank you. And what's the biggest assumption people make about you and your business that's wrong?
Because they talk to so many people that say, oh, I do well-being, and they think that I'm going to bring in some nice fruit and prescribe yoga classes. It really irritates me.
Yeah, well-being's one of those subjects that's quite trendy at the minute, but is not particularly well defined, right?
Correct.
Thank you. All right, cheers. Sharon, how are you?
Struggling with the mute button. Clearly it's the heat. Well, that's my excuse anyway.
Yeah.
Susan's
feeling the heat as well. That's why the mute button doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, hot, but good.
Just a bit.
Tell everybody a little bit about you, Sharon.
So I started Argos just over a year ago now. It's been a really, really interesting journey, and basically out of frustration with the accounting world, because I just think that we need to do more for our clients. We need to be more proactive. Everybody gives it that lip service that we're advisors, but what actually changes for our clients, and I found in 20 years in practice, very little had changed for our clients. So I'm a bit of an accounting rebel, and I like to do it differently.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? That advisory, you know, the accountants that I talk to tell me that advisory is the place to be, as opposed to just doing the technical elements, you know, like tax returns and stuff like that. Do you find that, in your experience, a lot of the accountants talk a good game but don't give enough advisory support, or what are your thoughts?
So having worked in 3 practices, a top 40, a West End one, and a smaller local one, which is where I started, that they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And that's the problem. They send clients information that they don't necessarily understand. They don't take the time to explain it to them and support clients in growing their businesses, in making those strategic decisions. So it is a bit different.
I think I said this to you the other day, because we have seen too much of each other over the past, well, I don't know, a lot of each other.
People are going to talk if you keep saying this.
I know Cassie was with us, Sharon, so I'm allowed to.
That's a good job, isn't it?
I'm allowed to say that. But I've lost my train of thought now. I forgot exactly what I was going to say. But okay. The reality is that I had a conversation years ago with a lawyer friend of mine who said to us, a big bulk of our job as professionals, it's to translate. It's to take this information that looks complicated and turn it into information that we can all understand and use practically. And I think sometimes with some professionals that connection's lost, isn't it?
100%. And if you just take the simplicity of I say simplicity of a management account, but for our clients who don't understand what you're presenting to them and who may or may not take in the information that you want, if you have a call with them and you say, look, these are the points we need to highlight, it's a very different conversation, because you're giving them a platform to ask questions in a way that they're comfortable. It's not effectively belittling their lack of knowledge, because you're just giving them an opportunity to have a conversation and understand this better. So the first time you do it, the second time you do it, third time is then a very different conversation, because they've got a bit more understanding of what they're looking at, and they know what to do with it.
And I think for me, the better a client is informed and educated, that's why the clients that we work best with are the clients we've worked with for years, because they know the dynamic of the relationship, and we've gone through an education process over time. So yeah, that's all good. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for joining us again. I really appreciate that. Let me just share my screen and we'll just talk through the pertinent points of the case study before we start to think about answering some of those questions. So we've got Steve Baser and his wife Billy. They run a business they inherited from Steve's dad. The business produces flooring based in Billericay, where they've got a warehouse and an office space, and then retail store on Brentwood High Street. Had a massive run of growth in the past 20 years, and the firm employs 22 people. So it's grown, but not in a massive way, just in a pretty consistent way. Times have been tough through the firm, particularly during the pandemic, because the retail premises closed. Steve thinks that Brentwood High Street, in terms of where he is a bit of a ghost town now. There's also a awkward atmosphere in the business. David announced his retirement in 2019, but isn't really retired, still pops his head in, and then impacts the dynamic. Billy adores her father-in-law, but feels that sort of she's stuck in this triangle where the personal and business relationships are getting in the way of the business. In terms of the shareholding, David continued to hold the majority of the shares, with Steve and Billy owning the remainder. The intention is for Steve to sit down and have a conversation where they're getting the commercials in place, but they haven't done this at this point in time. So there's no formalized agreement in terms of ongoing relationship with the business, and yeah, it's just sort of done on hope that things will move forward. And David has always run the business relatively informally. He's done what he can effectively get away with, but also grown the business profitably. David recently remarried Jean. Steve is concerned on the implications of the business, because he doesn't know whether David's made a will or power of attorney. The relationship's pretty good between Jean and Billy, with Steve, and the tensions in their personal relationships is a concern. And part of the challenge they've got is how to drive this business forward, because David is quite happy with pretty organic growth, and Steve wants to push the business forward in a bit more of a dynamic way. They also believe they've got a HR issue. Billy has been handed the mantle of dealing with HR, and they've got a HR experts service that helps and supports them, but they've got a few people who seem to be taking regular sick days, all at pretty consistent times. One guy on a Monday morning, one guy and somebody else very frequently with no particular pattern, and Billy just doesn't know what to do about that. Jean's son Alan has just taken over as the managing director at skydiving school. Their business is on a renewed period of growth as charities now start to fundraise a bit more actively. But Alan isn't sure that they recruit particularly well, and wants to have a look at that. Previously, they've used skydiving professionals, but they're effectively self-employed under their own personal services companies, but he's concerned about IR35 and how that might impact his business. Jean's dad, Frank, is currently living independently in his own flat, but Jean's a bit concerned about how long that's going to be sustainable, because even though Frank is mobile, Jean is worried about his memory and sort of loss of capacity. And Jean feels that now it might be the right time for Dad to move into somewhere that might provide him with a bit more support. On Wednesday, Jean explained to her dad her worries, but Frank told her he didn't want to move out the blue and make a decision too soon. So, a lot in there to unpick. The first question that we're going to try to answer is, what questions would you ask? So we're in a position where there's a lot of information, but there's probably a lot more we'd like to know from our own particular professional perspective. So let's start with what questions you might want to ask. As I always do on Inner Circle, any errors, omissions, gaps or contradictions, they're clearly all intentional, aren't they? I mean, I've done those on purpose just to give you a bit more sort of meat to play with, or we'll just say that. So let's start with Alex. What questions would you ask?
Okay, so I've got a list of a few actually. First of all, I really want to know whether David has actually retired, or is he sort of going in, doing a bit of work, not necessarily an employee, maybe not getting paid for it. Because if he's just popping in to say hi, they could just turn around and say, we don't want you on the premises, go away. They could be really hard-nosed about it, whether they would, say a completely different matter. I also want to know who are the directors, because ultimately it's the directors that are calling the shots in terms of the business running of it, etc. In terms of, do they have HR records regarding sickness absence? So, for example, the individual who is off on a Monday morning, is it always off with the same kind of thing? Is there a more of a pattern to that? Is it very much stress and anxiety, gets to Sunday evenings, panicking, not able to come in? Or is it very much he goes out the weekends, feels absolutely terrible on Monday with a bad hangover, and that's the reason? Is, for example, the receptionist's absence sort of maternity related? We've got to be careful to avoid sort of discrimination, for example. And sort of, is there a sickness absence policy? I mean, are they following sort of that? Have they got one? If not, should they have one? Probably yes. That's probably me in a nutshell.
Right, that's fine. That's fine. And in terms of, so assuming that Steve's dad continues to be a director of the business, because I'm assuming that they've not changed that, what could potentially Steve and Billy do then?
They could seek to remove him as a director, sort of go down that route. That may not be a bad thing, although, like I say, in terms of how that disrupts the business, family relations, etc. There's obviously outside considerations rather than just purely looking at it sort of legally speaking.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think that the interesting thing about it is because that, you know, that sort of like that emotional dynamic and those family dynamics are impinging on what might otherwise be more logical decisions. But thanks, Alex, really appreciate that. I'm glad we're coming to Raymond next, because this is right in Raymond's wheelhouse. So what do we do? What questions do we ask? How do we start with this?
Oh my God, I've got loads of things here, and I'm trying to work out what I was actually thinking when I did this morning. So one of the, let's get the easy bits out of the way around the finances and things like that. So if they talk about the retail element, I'd really like to know what the performance of that was over the last few years to see Steve, even though it's coming back. I agree about who are the directors. I also wanted to see what the articles were about in terms of being able to, what happens should anything happens to David and his shares, given there seems to be some tensions with Jean, the step mum, for want of a better way of describing that. But also there must have been an agreement at some point for David to step away. What did that agreement look like? And there was, I think I was really more into, you know what, Chris, I was really more interested in the end of this, in the conversation about Jean with her dad, if I'm honest, because I thought that was really, and the dynamics between Billy, is it Billy? Between Billy, Steve, and the tensions between running a business and having their family life. But I was interested to understand some of the questions around, for Jean's dad, for example, what is important to him? Because one of the questions when you're going to have a conversation about effectively taking someone's independence away, is to be clear what that person, whilst he's 91, understands what he sees as being independent, because that's really, really important. Oh my God, there was so much when I've got so many bits here. I've got the bits like Alex has got around the employees, and there was one other thing, and I'm struggling to read my handwriting, which is always good when you're doing it in the mornings. It's one of the things which I was between Billy and Steve, how do they manage, given that Billy loves her father-in-law, how they actually currently communicate between the three of them? So whether they're shareholders or directors or both, how they actually currently communicate, and just how that dynamic works of running. I know Steve dips in and out, but is there any formal structure of communication?
I think there's there's some really interesting points there. I mean, when you talk about Jean's dad, Raymond, I remember having a conversation with my dad and my granddad when my dad was sort of mid-80s, and him saying, "I'm never going to leave this flat. You know, I'm never, ever, ever going to, I'm never, ever going to choose to, because even if I can't move out of this flat, the independence for me of having my own roof over my head is important, and it means different things to different people, didn't it? And in the end, we got care in for him to support him, and that worked. But that's interesting. I suppose one of the questions that I want to flag on the next time round, based on what you've said, is if that arrangement, and it'll be one for the lawyers, I think, if there was an arrangement that was informal or verbal in nature between the three directors, where do they stand? So we'll come back to that next time around. Thanks, Ryan. Really appreciate that. Katie, tell us a little bit about what your thoughts were.
Well, initially, I think I had something similar to one of Raymond's last points in terms of meeting or encouraging everyone to meet and clarify what's best for everyone, because ultimately you still want the business to work and you've still got a lot of family dynamics. So I'll definitely be interested in I think Paul quoted the kind of like careful coaching piece of how you get people to that point. But specifically more from the HR perspective, similar things is, who am I advising? Who's got ownership of the business? What's their authority and leadership within their business in terms of people actually listening to them? What's the structure of the organisation? What processes and policies are in place already? What is followed, what isn't followed, what's taken into account, what isn't, what type of employees they have, their length of service, are the retail end of it at the moment on furlough or not? Will they be returning? Is there a way or an opportunity to review the organisation and the business moving forward once you've clarified that entire director and leadership process? What do HR currently help with, what they don't, to identify any missing gaps and so forth, things that we could also advise on.
I suppose the interesting thing, Katie, it goes back to something that Sharon said, that even though they're using an HR service, we don't know whether that HR service is advisory or not, or just a website delivering templates, do we?
Yeah, I think what we have all realised as small businesses that we still have to organise ourselves a bit like a large corporate. So you have to sort of, when you go in and help out a business, the areas that you can help support with, but you're already then adding on additional services or people that you recommend to ensure that business gets its full advisory service. And that's with anything. So you can have, you know, HR advice that can be great at, I don't know, recruitment and onboarding, but might be absolutely terrible at organisational change, redundancy, retirement, etc. So yeah, I did write a lot more, but I think listen to everybody else, but there was some HR specific sort of questions.
Yeah, I mean, the point you raise is a really good one. It's one of the reasons we run in a circle, because as financial planners, we know we haven't got all the answers. So having a team of other professionals around helps us support our clients more. So thanks, Katie. We'll definitely come back to you on the next time round. Just a personal comment. Just one of the best first debut appearances we've ever had. Yeah, that was really good. Kevin, I mean, your one was good, Kevin.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Don't worry about it. I'm hurt now, all these miles away, mate. Don't worry.
All right, talk to me about what.
Miles plus.
I'm in trouble for our next walk in the park. I know that. I'll have to get the coffees. Talk to me about what you feel.
Actually, I think this is very simple. It's shown where the specialists have got to work together. You've just said. My part will be the later end, it's the father and the grandfather side of it. But this is where good financial planning would come in with HR, with the solicitors, legal side. They're basically a typical situation of a family business wanting to grow, but being restricted by someone who says he's retiring, but choosing not to. So first question, do I sort that question out before I go anywhere else? Skydiving, I think, is side of it. Another part is how to go deal with the generation once first father has passed away or enjoyed life with his new wife. Important for the legal side, power of attorneys, just otherwise the wicked witch of the new wife could come in and buy a company or choose to sell the company under their feet. You've then got a situation there with the grandfather, 91, potential dementia, whatever, doesn't want to move out. Common situation we're dealing with a lot of situations with elderly clients. Good side of it is what type of care is needed. How far down the line? Care is a very long line. Yes, the lifetime lending come in and support funding on care, which obviously is more expensive in the home, but it's more important. Before we go across to going into care, 1-2 lenders now will have dementia. If anyone has dementia, they're accept, but they have no early repayment charges. Very smooth switching over. So that's where I would come in. Once a lot of other professionals have been in that side, we're coming more to family position.
Oh, that's interesting. So are you saying that if, for example, the property did need to be sold to pay for care and it was dementia related, there wouldn't be any early repayment charge?
No early repayment charge with one very strong major lender. There would be no early repayment charge in it. So step is a lot of the time now people want that in their own home. I can't blame. I haven't gone through several things with mother-in-law and whatever. I wouldn't be sitting in a care home and be put in bed at 6:30 at night.
Yeah, right.
On that side, so keeping in our home is excellent. But to have this option one particular in doing it now, any proof of dementia, no early repayment charges. So it's a very smooth transition across. That enables the family then to be able to rent out the property if they want to supplement income. So that's not the good side of it.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate that. Paul, what questions would you ask? Paul? Paul, I think you're still on mute. Clearly, Zoom is not being friendly with us today, is it? You know, we've had.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah. So clearly, there's a lot of intergenerational and intertwining here of people's agendas and their needs. So I think the questions I'd ask is firstly from David. You know, what does he want? You know, does he have a number in mind if he wants to go off and enjoy this? You know. His new life with his new wife. And you know, what's his motivation for staying in the business? Is he getting bored? I mean, his wife not taking him off dancing enough? I don't know, whatever. You need a lot of conversations with people like that to know really what they want. And he's probably worried he's giving up his baby and all that sort of stuff. Once you clarified that, and then I think then you'd have to say, right, how do we turn this from being sort of a David's lifestyle business into Steve and Billy's, you know, proper company. And that's not being disparaging to the founder of the business, because he's done very well. But you need to separate the two somehow. Otherwise, you're always being, you know, it's like having bindweed in your garden. You're forever pulling more of it away because you can never see what's underneath. So I think that's very important. The questions are, what does he want? And if it is a question, how much is it? What's enough? You know, that we ask that, you asked that question. Yeah. And I think, again, this is an ideal one where you'd actually have a financial wealth planner in the same room at certain points with, you know, someone like myself and others to say, look, how can we achieve that? You know, what do you want? How do we do that? Otherwise, you're having unconnected conversations. But
certainly,
yeah. So that would be.
I mean, the interesting thing is, like, some of those questions are certainly be questions that we'd ask clients.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I had a conversation over the last few days with a new client where I've got the feeling that money wasn't the primary focus. So they wanted to make sure they got to the stage of financial independence, but actually the conversation was around stuff. And the question that worked really well for that particular dynamic is what gets you up in the morning? What actually are you motivated and inspired and infused about? That means that you can do it. Because for David, it still might be, well, I still love work, and that might be part of the problem, mightn't it?
But it could be part of the solution. So you say, fine, well, okay, you can still carry on as a non-exec or what have you, and you know your insights might be more valuable. It's interesting. I had something not dissimilar to this recently, where I helped family business, and the mother had inherited the business from the father who died about 5 years ago, and the daughter had stepped up to the plate. And they all decided suddenly they needed to exit. The mother is in her 70s. She did want to go off, but when you talk to, you're quite right. They say they want to go, but you say, well, hang on, you still own 80% of the shares. Why haven't you transferred them? So there is a psychological point here.
It's digging a bit under,
underneath it. You have to get behind really what is driving them. Is it that that's their bargaining position? Because had they started the process 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it would have been a lot easier, because now obviously it's going to cost more to get the number that the majority shareholder needs. So often it's about understanding what's the real motivation and how do you overcome that.
So the underlying motivation and just working out sort of where, and if there is a potential plan to exit, making sure they've got enough time to do it.
Exactly.
Not tomorrow. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate that. Okay. Sharon, talk to me about your thoughts. Now, can I just say one thing in my defence? I don't know why I'm defending this, but in my defence, sometimes we go a bit more number heavy, and I know how good you are with like sort of give me the numbers and I'll give you a clearer picture. I've sort of avoided it this month because I wanted it to be a bit more soft, facts and feelings related and dynamic related. So apologies for that.
You don't need to apologise, but it is one of my questions, is where's the numbers information? Who looks after the numbers information?
Yeah, I know. I haven't given you anything this month, have I really? I haven't given you anything at all.
You're fine.
I'm putting it in red, must improve next month. Where's the numbers?
I'll remind you. But the thing is, these decisions that need making, and there are obviously decisions need making, can't be made without the numbers.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What numbers you're going in? You want a really good indication. What 5 or 6 numbers would you ask for first?
Have a look at turnover, and I'd want to have a look at historical turnover. Let's see the impact, the exact impact. We say that we know that there's been a challenge, obviously, with the shop being closed. But what's the impact? Has that meant that there's been a bit more stuff online? Has there been anything online? So definitely turnover. I'd have a look at the gross margin and what have they been paying suppliers? Have they negotiated with suppliers? What are their overheads? Have they managed to reduce their overheads while their income's reduced? So just key ones to begin with. Let's not make it too complicated, but just some management accounts, simple management accounts, to say that this is where we're at, a snapshot as at now, and then look at historical.
So I suppose the other thing that sort of I was sort of wondering when I was writing it is, yes, retail has taken a hit over the past 18 months in a lot of sectors. How would you help that business decide, and this is for everybody and we'll come back to this, how would you help that business decide whether the retail space was potentially an ongoing proposition for the future? Because like the last year might not be the best indication of what it's going to do in the future, right?
No, absolutely. But you watch the business hopefully pick up. So you're doing monthly management accounts to really keep an eye on that. And Brentwood High Street is a high street I know relatively well. There is a good end and a dead end. And by the sounds of it, he's possibly up the dead end. So in that case, the chances of this business recovery, even post-pandemic, is slim. That end of the high street doesn't get a lot of footfall. So it's a case of what else can they do? Is it an offering they can take online? Relocate possibly if you want to keep a retail shop, because Brentwood High Street for that end is not great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions?
Other questions? Yeah, who's LPAs for the business, LPAs for shares? Obviously, this all got to be touched on because it seems to be, their paperwork seems very lacking.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll come back round and start talking about specific recommendations in a minute. Hannah-Lee, talk to me about what questions you'd ask.
I mean, the first one for me has got to be really obvious. Who does have wills? Who does have LPAs?
Yeah.
Once you start sort of delving into that, when did they make the wills? And all of that sort of stuff, whether it needs updating. I'd also want to know, I know everything's been dealt with informally, but whether they do have anything like a shareholders agreement, what the articles say, if anything, in regards to directors and incapacity, you know, can they be removed, that sort of thing, or can an LPA apply? Much the same as already been mentioned, I'd want to know who the directors were.
Yep.
With, is it Frank, the older gentleman?
Dave.
No, Frank.
Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the first lot. With Frank, I'd want to know a bit more. There's mention that he's losing his memory. Is that actually an incapacity issue? Does he understand anything at this point? We need to get that kind of assessed. And I'd want to know the nature of the discussion that's been had with Frank. So if it is a case of sometimes, oh, do you want to go into a care home? Like has been said, most people are going to say no. But is it that Frank would be willing to kind of accept a bit more assistance if he felt like he would still be independent? Or is it simply one of those things he doesn't understand what's being said, and he has this image of himself being a 50-year-old or something, and not the 91 that he is? Yeah,
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? You know, that prejudgment we make about care before knowing what our options are, and that might be part of the challenge here, because he's immediately sort of said, I'm not doing it, when actually it might make getting some help might make his life a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't quite know if this is a house or flat that he's lived in for many years. That's his home. You don't know what's happened, or we don't know because of the lack of information of whether he's been in there with a spouse or anything, and that's where his memories are the strongest.
Yeah. And then I suppose the other thing that sprung to mind in your space, Hannah-Lee, is because David's remarried, and I know that we've both tackled this issue recently, is that impact on a will on marriage, right?
Yeah. So that's why I'd want to know when it was done, because if it was done prior to the marriage, obviously that could influence it. It might be that he took the appropriate advice, and it's fine. Otherwise, we could be in a kind of intestacy situation. And with the two of them, because it's not even just David, obviously, Jean's also got a child from a previous relationship, making sure that both sides of the family are provided for if they want it that way.
I think half of the challenge with this sort of situation is just the clarity, isn't it? You know, there's no clarity in terms of what their intentions are, and they've been too vague.
Yeah, exactly, because it might be that David turns around and goes, "Oh no, I do want it all to go to my wife." In which case, sorry, Steve and Billy, but
then how does that impact the business? You know,
well, exactly. You know, that's the next thing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Annalie. Alison, what were your questions and thoughts?
Well, before that, I'm afraid I have to go completely off piste and just share that my solicitor's just pinged and we've got a completion date of the 9th of August.
Oh, amazing stuff. Now, I know you've been waiting for that for a while, haven't you?
30th of March. I'm really struggling to keep myself firmly planted on this chair and not go running around the neighbourhood.
Oh, that's great news. Oh, congratulations. Good. Well, I'm pleased that you can start your questions with some amazing positive news.
Actually, I haven't got that many because most of the questions were either covered by Alex or Katie in relation to HR records, what the actual what they were actually putting on their absence reporting. Just one question about, you know, the policies and procedures. Do they actually have, if they do, let's assume they do have something in place because they have a legal requirement to do so. So let's assume that they do, but are they policies and procedures that actually have enough teeth to help in these situations? Would be my question.
I suppose that helps to a certain extent with the employees.
Yeah.
But then you've also got the issue with the ownership of the business, and if you've got 3 directors there, you know, how do those policies and procedures support that conversation?
Yeah. And are they actually following the policies and procedures? Because if they've grown up sort of organically, do they actually refer back to them? Yeah. Who've they been created by the person that's been given the responsibility, or the outside company? But also, you know, if you do have HR issues, you have to have some grievance procedure and everything to be able to deal with issues in case you need to take it further. And, you know, some of the basic stuff that you get off a lot of the websites, they have the policies and procedures that give you the basics, but they don't really actually help you go through disciplinary procedure or anything. Not that I'm assuming that that's what's needed in this case, but obviously it needs to be there just in case.
I suppose from your perspective, you know, looking at that factor of resilience, let's say, for example, you was helping Steve, who's sort of grown up in the business, dad's still trying to sort of take charge. How would you support him to make sure that he's comfortable with that situation? Because it's quite an awkward one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely spending some time with Steve and finding out what he wants to do, but it's also making sure that he's got support from somebody that also talks to him from a plan B perspective, which wouldn't necessarily be me, but it'd be finding somebody else that could also talk to him about his own future plans, because there's no guarantee that the dad's going to walk away from it at this point. He's making the right noises, but there are guarantees. So somebody might need to sit down and have a difficult conversation with him and say, well, what if he doesn't retire? What are your options? What do you want to do? Do you want to stay? Do you want to do something else? Do you want to set up a business, a similar business, a branch office in a different area? There's lots of options, but somebody needs to sit down and talk to him. But certainly from the management perspective, somebody to just help his mindset. He's indicating to me somebody that is avoiding at the moment. So I think a bit of coaching, one-to-one coaching, would be probably quite good for him at the moment, just to help him feel comfortable with approaching it, and give him some ways of going in and talking to his dad would be something that would help him. but then we're jumping into solution, not questions there.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I think from a financial planning perspective, one of the questions that we use is from a book that I love, and apologies if I've mentioned this before, but from a book that I love called Design Your Life by Bill Burnett. And it goes back, Alison, in terms of what you talked about in terms of those sort of looking at alternative options for the future. And the example it gives is have 3 plans in mind. So plan A, if everything went perfectly, what would the outcome you want be? Plan B, if everything didn't go your way, what would happen then, and what would you do? And then plan C is my favourite. It's called in the book they call it the wild card plan, which is effectively if you knew you'd never run out of money again, and you knew nobody would laugh, how would you live your life? And I think that's a really insightful question in terms of helping people explore what the future might look like. It's really good. Okay, great stuff. So Alex, we've
One more question, if I may.
Sure.
So this is a question not related to the well-being, well, a little bit related to the well-being side, but from my own experience, from when my father was very ill and passed away in 2019, one of the things that my financial advisor recommended to me, he put me in touch with an amazing lady that actually specializes in later life care. So he, as the financial advisor, looked at all the finances for mum and dad to see what mum's picture would be going forwards, and giving a level of reassurance that she was going to be financially secure. But the bit that we really struggled with was navigating the NHS and what sort of care was available and what steps we needed to take to get that care in place. And somebody actually recommended a later life specialist that actually sits with you and walks you through and does the report for you on that. So the question was just, do they know that is
available?
That is available, and if they did know, would they take advantage of it? Because that in itself, dealing with somebody that's getting into that situation, can be incredibly stressful for the people that have to look after them.
Then it goes back to that conversation we were having earlier, right? You know, like sort of, if you don't know what your options are, you can't make an informed choice, can you?
Yeah. And it's one of the best things I did, getting that report and getting that support in actually managing my own way through with my dad's illness. It just helped massively.
So I might ask you to introduce me to this particular individual, because we haven't got somebody on hand who does that specific job, and that could potentially be useful. As I'm thinking about the clients that we look after, potentially that might be something really useful. In terms of the report, was it the options that they've got in terms of the types of care? Help me understand the context of that. So,
yeah, they talked you through everything, basically. So what questions to ask if somebody's been in hospital and they're coming out, who to engage in the NHS from social workers within the GP practice, how to get the right questions asked, how to get a physical assessment done to see what sort of care the person is assessed to needing, and then talk you through the different types of care available and what the associated costs are, where you would have to give money, where it's actually paid for, who pays for it. Yeah, just everything. It was such a comprehensive report. It was the best step I ever did when my dad was sick.
It's really useful.
It just gave me some amazing peace of mind that I felt like I took the control back, that I knew who to ask and what to ask them. It was brilliant.
An introduction might be really useful. I'll talk to you about that offline.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Alex, talk to me about so we've got the questions, we've answered the questions, we're gathering that information. Talk to me about recommendations. What are you thinking about in terms of what specific actions you'd specifically put in place to make sure that we could support the people in the case study?
I think, first of all, I think I'd probably really want to know what the company's objective is, because we've got David, we've got the HR issues, we've got the absent employees, the IR35 point. So is it the case that they just want sort of David to be less involved? Is it they want him to move from the business completely? Because obviously we need to go down different routes.
Okay, so let's assume that they're all three directors, and they've got Steve and Billy have got a different motivation to David. How do you make sure that you're all pointing in the same direction?
That's very difficult sometimes. I think certainly where you've got someone that has sort of retired, and you've got them sort of two individuals who are sort of trying to take over from their father in this case. They tend to be, I think everyone tends to have a common goal though, in terms of this business flourishing. And if David's attendance in the office, so to speak, is having a detrimental impact, is David necessarily wanting that to, I guess, fall on his shoulders? Could there just be a very soft conversation? This is the result of your attendance, for example. Yeah. This is what's happening. It's a distraction, for example. And you want this business to thrive. Just take a step back, or try and work sort of through that softly, rather than automatically go into, okay, we'll take steps to terminate your employment.
Yeah, well, particularly if that business is his legacy, right? You know, if it's not only about the money, it's about the work and effort he's put in to build it up.
These are not necessarily some of these sort of legal issues, but like I said, a sort of holistic approach, taking that step back and looking at, I guess, sometimes the bigger picture. Again, with the sort of absent employees, are they going to look to go down sort of a capability route, or do they need to be referred to occupational health, for example? Yeah. These sort of types of, I guess, considerations, because obviously they want to deal with it on a capability route. We need to go down a particular path. It's very much sort of softly, then a slightly different way. Yeah. The last point I had is in terms of sort of the IR35 point. Yeah. About, sort of skydiving. Is it very much sort of self-employed? Is it very much employee worker status? I think we have to go through and make sure that this individual is truly sort of self-employed.
Well, I'd hope they're not supplying their own equipment, Alex.
No, I would.
Because that's one of the rules of the R35 thing, isn't it? You know, are you bringing your own stuff? I'll use your parachute, thanks.
I'd stay clear of skydiving, I have to say. It's probably not my first sort of weekend plans, that's for sure. But we talk about, I say, we all think that Uber drivers were sort of self-employed, and obviously recently they're actually a worker.
Yeah.
So, well, you say, well, of course I'm self-employed. I raise an invoice and get paid. But actually, we look beyond what the label says.
Yeah. And
actually, what's happening in reality, and more often than not, what's happening in reality is very different from what a contract says.
Yeah. And how has the Uber case had an impact on how this world is now perceived? Because I'd imagine that sort of it's generating an element of case law.
It has. I mean, obviously, sort of they started with Uber, and then you sort of got sort of Deliveroo drivers, etc. And I suppose it has had a benefit in terms of gig economy, employment, etc. Obviously, now sort of Uber drivers are workers; they're entitled to minimum wage, they're entitled to holiday pay, etc. I think ultimately it's going to help, or does help the economy. It's more money going into people's pockets.
Yeah.
Etc. And obviously, it stops people being treated unfairly to some extent. Just because you are Uber doesn't mean you can treat people as you wish.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I remember being in Greece a few years ago, and Uber have got an arrangement with the Greek government, and where they can't directly employ self-employed drivers in Greece. They've got into an Uber, and he was an employee of a company that contracted with Uber, and that company then had to give him employment rights. And I didn't know at the time that different countries have got different commercial arrangements like that. I assume that every Uber driver works in a similar way, but I think that was to a certain extent to do with how Greece wanting to protect their workers. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, it's good. Okay, great, thanks. Raymond, talk to me about recommendations that you'd make.
Well, I was so looking. I think one of the things which I do with clients, and I think especially when you have so if you're going to have older parents and that sort of thing, and I think having to find, once you get the plan for what good looks like for the dad to leave the business and have a plan for that. I think one of the things for Billy and Alex is actually to create, if he wants to go gung-ho around the business, as they create some kind of well, I can't think of a better word from it than family and business manifesto, which is actually something that brings the two together. And I think that's something you can actually do with the dad, so that there is consistency in terms of his exit in some way, shape or form over a time that works, that actually brings all that. I agree with Sharon, you get all the numbers and you then know how everything comes together, but you bring that, this is what we want, this is what the numbers look like, and this is good for dad. And I think one of the things which we didn't so much talk about before is it's great that Billy has a great relationship with her father-in-law, because that's not always the case, especially when her husband is going to be having some rather interesting conversations with his dad about what exit looks like.
Yeah, and I suppose the challenge you've got with this case is, look, and this comes to the dynamics you work with clients all the time. It's not just a logical conversation, is it? It's involved, a lot of emotions involved. How do you navigate that? What would your starting point be to help make sure the conversations are as productive as possible?
I think one of the challenges actually in that is everyone just getting everything on the table that's important to them, and almost stepping out of the emotional conversation and say, it's just information right now. Put everything down that is important to you, and all the challenges you can also see for some of the things that you're going to be asking for. Because I think when you start thinking about, I know that I'm going to, so when the dad says, well, look, if I want to be in the business 3 days a week or whatever it is, he knows that's going to impact on his son. And actually to recognize, I think part of it is the recognition that, and I had this with the husband and wife team, where the husband's going, I know my wife doesn't agree with me on this. This is how I think, and he's saying to her, I know you don't agree. So there's this recognition immediately that whilst they come from different places, there's enough respect between them to know we don't see eye to eye on this right now. So let's have a conversation around what we don't see eye to eye on. And I think if you actually get the three of them in a room and actually just say, look, I know this is difficult for you, and this is, you can actually, I
suppose part of it is just, the starting point is let's understand where from your perspective, as opposed to just making decisions from mine. And I think that's where sometimes the animosity comes in, when we're not appreciating those other perspectives, right?
Yeah, and I think, and sometimes when you take those, understand those other perspectives, and it's the same with Jean and her dad, right? One of the things about as you get older is, whilst you may become more childlike, you are not a child. Yes, and I think sometimes just treating someone who is older with respect and recognizing their view, even the old one about losing his memory, as my dad used to say, is like, I don't need to go see the memory expert. Why? Because I already know I'm losing my memory, and they can't tell me something I don't already know. But it's that recognition that they do understand, that they recognize where they are. And actually in all of this, I think just seeing the other person's point of view and listening to that, I think you can create a way forward that just brings it. And I think you've got to document it. You also about informality, and I think sometimes we get this, I think we seem to sometimes be very black and white, and that is either legal or it's not legal, right, in some respects. And actually when you're working with family and you're working as part, actually just getting things down and actually creating something that is co-created and agreed,
that hasn't got to be legal.
It hasn't got to be legal. It's just got to be something you can stick on the fridge sometimes and actually say, this is what we agreed. Is this still true?
Well, it's interesting because we use that with clients. So when we take a new client, the first thing that we do is we create what we call a discovery document. Mm-hmm. And effectively that's the written record of that first meeting, that conversation. And there's no sort of, it's me and a pad and a pen, basically, just saying how can I help, and understand a lot about them. And then we send that to the client and say, this is my understanding of where we are. Is this your understanding of where we are? Or have I got something wrong? Do you want to add something? Have I made any mistakes? Is there anything else you want to tell me? So there's a documented, shared method of saying, I'm basing my advice and basing my recommendations on what you've told me. Now, having a shared understanding of where that triangle sits might be interesting, right? Because then you've got, an indisputable way of saying, look, this is how I feel about it, this is how I feel about it, and this is how I feel about it. Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, and one of the things about all the what a lot of what's in here is actually a third person or a third party would be a massive advantage in all of these conversations, because one of the things that happens when families talk, and I'm sure Paul was looking at like whether you sell or don't sell and all the rest of it, is there's so much emotion in it. Actually, what you do in some ways, when you can turn to someone who cares but is impartial, for one, I think it's important that you have both of those aspects. You actually don't feel my experience with working with husbands and wives is that because you're impartial, but you have, at the end of the day, you're there for them to make sure that they get the best answer come for them. I think they almost feel that it kind of brings the temperature down, and you can actually just talk about what is some of the real challenges that are in the room. And some of them go, and especially when you're dealing with older and generational differences, and different perspectives and everything else on life.
Different ways of looking at the world, right?
It's different, and it is about, and then having been that third party, trying to do it on your own, and maybe of having, like Steve and his dad having had a conversation that says, we had an understanding. Yes, we've all done that, haven't we? We all had an understanding and with our parents, and then suddenly realise it's not what we agreed the same thing.
But the challenge is, the challenge of it, particularly I'm thinking about my dad now, Raymond, his perception of what an understanding might be different to mine, right? And that's the reality of it. But that's really useful. So all three of them in a room, recording their information as a third party, independent person who cares and supports, but is going to be impartial, and then moving forward makes sense to me. So great stuff. Anything else should be taken action on?
No, I really like I think you then need to believe that you need to have the core professionals. So when you talk about the financial advisors, like the Sharons who are able to bring the finances together, I think they need to see that it's a professional support that's able to help them, rather than the numbers might say one thing, but actually having that third party view of the core numbers and everything else, I think is also very important.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, certainly from our perspective, like one of the questions would be, what makes you happy, and what does financial independence look like for you to live the life you want to live? And it's connecting that, like similar to the way you do it, connecting the numbers, but also the emotion of having peace of mind that you're going to be financially okay is an interesting conversation. I don't think that certainly for my clients, we can't do that alone. We need to work with other professionals to support us to do that. But brilliant. Thanks, Raymond. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the additional professional support you might want to bring in later in the run. Katie, talk to me, apart from banging their heads together, which is not a bad move, what would you be recommending for this particular individuals in this case study?
Well, I wondered whether we could rephrase it as maybe a delicate reset. So if you've got to the point where you can try and kind of assign roles to the three key people, so I think it's David's that advisory role, Steve might be leading the business, Billy may be the kind of person looking after the HR side of things, whatever, and you kind of carve it out that way. The other key thing for me is the business strategy. You've got to know what your plan is for the next 3 to 5 years in order to effectively advise around, your organisational structure, where you're heading. And so having kind of key plans around that. Once that's in place, then absolutely. The solutions would be, what are the key core roles that you're going to need? What infrastructure do you need behind that? what are those missing gaps in relation to, we've said it before, the policies and processes and so forth. What's the development plan for you as the directors and your staff? What other communication channels and things like engagement and wellbeing and so forth support? Your benefits package, what does that look like? Does that need a reset and a refresh? And then you can then start thinking about some of those micro points around individual employees and so forth. But if you don't have enough in place at the moment, then you've obviously got to put that in place first before you start dealing. Obviously, as part of the reset, if there are a few troublemakers or individuals that you think it's worth having that chat or that conversation to say, absence unacceptable, this is the current kind of policy and what we've been doing, but actually we're going to monitor this far more closely, and things like that can be put in place, or you can address it head on. But it really depends on what you've got at the moment as your backup plan, what you've been doing historically, and what you want to achieve going forward. They might be your 3 best employees, so there might be an element of delicate, So again, just focusing on the business probably rather than the poor chap who's going into the care home, because that's not necessarily my expertise.
Yeah. So yeah, I like the idea of the business reset idea, but I'd be worried, Kate, if you said that to me. I'd start sort of protecting my head, because like if you're just like if you are going to bang heads together, I don't want you to bang my head together.
I mean that as I say, if you've got to the point whereby, and there'll be other people that would, like Raymond suggested, getting people in a room with somebody independent, and got to that point where they realise that there needs to be some change to be made.
I'll tell you what's interesting. It's something we do in our business to pretty decent effect. That what we're good at, what should we be focusing our time on? And that E-Myth thing where you just break down every task in the business to and assign responsibility to someone. I mean, Cassie will tell you, Katie, that I'll try and give away as much as possible because I'm still trying to work out what I'm good at. But like just going through that strategic thought process, and we've got a strategic meeting for Cervello next week where we're sort of doing some of this work, but going through that strategic process and saying, and actually doing it on a regular basis. So as the business evolves, saying, look, who do we need in place now so we're going through a recruitment process at the minute. And I said to the guys in the office, we need to work out what jobs aren't being done as efficiently as possible, so that we're clear on when that person comes in, they're doing the right job, and it supports the recruitment process. I think part of the interesting conversation, this comes back to that strategy one, is this is quite like, if you look at Cervello, Cassie and I are pretty well aligned because we talk about all the time on where we're going with Cervello. The challenge that you've got in this particular case study is Dad is in a different place to son and daughter. So how do you get to a point where you clarify where that clear goal is?
Well, I think it's about maybe capturing the intent and what they're looking for, and then obviously then trying to build a plan around that to support everybody, with a view possibly of slowly moving away some of the tasks and responsibilities from Dave, and obviously assigning them. But I mean, if it's got to be done in a very sort of slow and sympathetic and empathetic way, then you do a plan that takes you, a couple of years to get to that point. You don't strip everything away from day one. I've got a client that can't cope with more than about 3 tips per month for them to think about, digest, and then implement, because they just haven't had anything in place for so long. And so, unless anything really critical comes up or there's really hot fires to put out, then you can think about maybe doing it in a different way. And once people start to see the benefit of that and the operational difference it makes, and whether it's the golf course or whether it's the painting or whatever it might be, becomes more enjoyable, then, quite often human nature allows you to then take that step back and let other people.
I'm 100% with you on that, like bite-sized chunks as opposed to 100 things at once, because humans are more likely to get those 3 little jobs done one in a month and then 3 more little jobs done than 12 jobs done immediately.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, reset doesn't have to be, as I say, 24 hours to completely change the entire landscape of the company. It can be a 3 to 5 year plan. And you don't have to agree on everything, but I think the key things are, do you still want to make money? Do you still want to deliver what you're doing? Do you still want to kind of have staff? Do you still want a retail unit? Do you still want a business office? There's some sort of basic things like that you could possibly get some alignment to, that could be your starting point.
I think the interesting conversation actually is a bit deeper than that. I think, what values do Steve, Billy and Dave share as humans? And then just build on that. But it's an interesting one. Thanks, Katie. Really appreciate that. I'm not going to say anything about your second debut appearance because I don't want to upset Kevin. Kevin, what solution?
You know me better than actress. You've got a lot of time anyway.
Yeah, you're not easily offended, mate. Let's be honest.
That's it.
All right, talk to me about what solutions you'd be looking at.
I think the solution is, first of all, like we said, meeting around a table, split it down to business instead of the family. Ask them direct questions. What's your plans to retire? Stop dilly-dallying. We would like to retire, but these are what we like, the role we like you to have.
See, it's really interesting one, because I don't know how you feel about this, Kev, but we've stopped using the word retirement in our business, right? And the reason we've stopped using it is because a lot of our clients who are David's age, probably a bit younger, 55 to 70 when they first come and see us, tell us that
it's me today, Chris.
Yeah, no, I won't put. I wasn't assuming that you were in that particular age gap, Kev. I know clearly you're a lot younger, so I'm not. But the conversation over the past sort of 20 years that I've been a financial advisor financial advisor planner, has moved from a what do we get you to make sure you never work again to how do we get you to a point where work is optional, so that actually if you choose to carry on because it inspires you and you love it, and how do we get you to that point? And then it doesn't, our experience is that conversation is then a bit more empowering than somebody just going, I get to financial independence and I've got to stop. And to a lot of people, I think the perception of retirement is that. So, I mean, how do you feel?
Phased retirement would be a nice way. Let's
start
to be diplomatic. How would you like to phase some work, less work, more work balance?
Yeah, less work, more pleasure. Sounds all right.
That's what I think the short conversation is got to let grow.
Yeah, if you spoke to Cassie about that, apparently I'm phasing way too early. Yeah, but
that's fair enough.
We'll see.
Then you've got to go back to the son, explaining what he would like to do with the business and how he go forward from there. Once that situation is then sorted, then you can sort out the other 2 or 3. I think that's the starting point.
Yeah, dad first.
It's got to be dad first and the structure of the business. Because unfortunately, if dad's new wife survived and he had a heart attack, they're knackered in a polite way as a business. So that's why it should be first, because you're feeding 2, 3, 4 generations people potentially.
Yeah.
So that's why it's got to be the first one.
And in terms of the conversation you'd have with Frank, Jean's dad, about that, I mean, I think Alison's idea of just empowering that conversation with somebody who looks at all of the care options is a really good one.
Yeah.
How would you involve that conversation from a suitability perspective about whether lifetime mortgages or sort of releasing equity from their property might be appropriate?
Well, this is where vulnerability comes in. So straight away you have other family members there with him, if he's happy, or you initially say to him, right, we'll talk to you on your own. First of all, you can't presume a 91-year-old is not sharp enough to talk about his own life.
Yeah.
I've dealt with a few 90-year-olds who are sharper than people in their 60s. But you could have a 2-stage meeting. The main part then is to bring in the other specialisms, place life carer planner. Yes, I'll be interested in that detail as well. Just not 1 or 2, but it's always good to have an alternative. How you bring the skills in from that side, or we would do a umbrella overview, pointing people to the website. So it depends whether they want the 100% advice, some to carry in their hands, or they're able to go to the various websites. It's not as difficult to it is there to run it. That's the first questions. Really ask Frank what quality of life does he want? How independent can he be? And if different stages in life, when does it get to a point where we may have to consider moving out of home? Where you can't look after stuff, you're a danger. That's the conversation that you bring in that side.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate that.
Cheers, mate.
Paul, talk to me about your thoughts around recommendations.
Right, I'm off mute now. Yes, I think echoing really what everyone's saying. I think these sorts of things, from my experience, it's a sort of process, because you're going from a place you know and love and you've lived with, and actually you may not be happy with it, but actually it's there, isn't it? And we assume it's producing income for them, so it's just status quo. So it's about getting, as everyone says, getting on to have really sensible conversations. What do they really want, whatever. And then I think bringing people together so they don't feel everyone's being talked about offline, as it were.
Yeah.
But you've got to be careful how you stage that, because you don't want to suddenly get everyone together and then you have a massive sort of confrontation. So I would suggest you have a series of mini meetings with all the key actors, if you like, and then you start to bring them together in groups. And the thing I use is just a big wall with lots of post-its, and give everyone lots of post-it notes, and you give them lots of questions. And I mean, simple things like, what do you want to do less of, and what do you want to do more of? And less of means less solving the problems in the business, less worrying about this issue or whatever, and more of, in Steve's case, building the business and so forth. And maybe in David's case, more holidays, because his wife wants him to go to Mauritius or what have you. So gradually you build up a sort of, excuse me, mosaic of what everybody wants. And you obviously have to say to everyone, as Kevin and others have said, what are the implications of that? What are the unintended consequences? It may not have enough money for all this. We'd all love to have, poolside, whatever, beachside house in the Bahamas, perhaps, but we can't all afford that. So, what can you do? And gradually, I think a plan evolves, and then obviously you've got to implement it very quickly. But it is about getting consensus around not everything, but it's a bit, what the things you can coalesce around. And once you've got that, then you start the plan and start it moving quickly, because it strikes me that, this business could take a dive unless it's actually looked after.
Well, I suppose part of the challenge is status quo might have worked for them for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
And how do you, if you're having a conversation with the leaders of the business, how are you making sure they understand the potential impact of not sitting status quo? Because they might turn around and say, well, look, this has worked for us for a while. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, I think one of the things you do, somebody talked about the retail situation. I mean, we are in an extraordinary time, so this may well have been a blip, and you'll never see it again. But just go back and look at the data. What were the trends? What was the business? Was it delivering 60% of profit or 20%, whatever? Or was it just there because they'd always had a shop? But actually they'd never perhaps counted it. And then what are the other retail trends in their sector? Do a bit more research, because they're probably, again, the status quo encourages people to think inwardly. They don't look around. They don't look at what's happening. So what's the other industry doing? You could do a bit of a check around. You do your own research, could you, on competitors in their area. What are the wider trends around flooring? People going for hard flooring, what it happens to be.
Yeah.
What could they do to really sort of get this business going? And I think the problem is you've got somebody who's done very well up to now, but maybe he's done very well selling horses and carts, but actually we've moved on a bit. So
yeah, the trends changed. Yeah,
exactly.
And it's an interesting one. There's probably plenty of examples in business around this.
Yeah.
I was having this conversation this morning, funny enough, with a potential new client. And she was saying the bigger the business her business has got, the more internally focused she's been, because she's got more responsibilities, the bigger the business has, and she's stopped doing that. And she's firefighting, she's dealing with problems within the business. In your experience, how do you then cultivate that change in perspective?
Well, I think you've got to say to people, look, you can't do it all. I mean, there's there's the ultimate one. If you get struck down by COVID tomorrow, really badly, you can't run the business. You can try from your bedroom, but if you're coughing and spluttering, that won't be really well. Who else is going to take over? So you can try the sort of the stick and carrot thing. I think you've just got to make people realize what are the implications if they don't actually start to change. And that means you've got to build an infrastructure, you've got to have a governance in there, you've got to have people who can run the business when you're not there. And often, they can run it better than you can, or that bit of it. You've got, the owner's got the vision perhaps and the drive, but it's the people actually operating that actually need to do it.
Did you say formalise a lot of that stuff, right?
Absolutely, formalise it as fast as you can, and obviously put all the checks and balances in. But I think sometimes people need a few wake-up calls, and medical issues tend to do that, don't they? Makes us realise how fragile we all are.
I mean, it's interesting, and I think I've said this to everybody, and probably on an circle before. Interestingly, commercially, Cervello's had a really good year, and I think part of that is because of a change of perspective, and people aren't sort of turning around and going, "My financial planner can wait until next year. Actually, I need to do stuff now." So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's highlighted and sort of highlighted the need to get affairs in order, sort of more than ever. Sharon, talk to me a little bit about what you'd recommend. Are you banging heads together, Sharon?
No, but I am going to shout because they need to get their finances in order.
Where are the numbers?
And understand the numbers, because all of this, that they have no clarity. There's no one mentioned that takes responsibility for their finances. That they could be paying suppliers twice for all you know, because A could be doing it and so could B. That there's just no. So yeah, I would say to them they need to get a handle on their finances.
And when you say get a handle, are you talking about who's responsible, or how is it managed?
Yeah, who's responsible? So one person needs to take overall responsibility and understand the numbers. Let's have a look at the numbers. They think they know what's happening, but what is actually happening?
Yeah,
that's something we can measure.
Particularly in their business, which is reliant on goods, right? Like sort of buying into, like, sort of our businesses are service related, slightly different sort of. But how long are they retaining stock? And I'm
assuming they have some kind of an idea of what stock they've currently got and what the value is. Taking it that's a bit of a given, says she with her fingers crossed.
Yeah. No, I mean, you'd hope so, but as you say, you don't want to keep your profits in the stock cupboard, as you like to say,
exactly.
As opposed
don't store your profits in the stationery in the stock cupboard, because it doesn't serve you well there.
Yeah. So you're going in. You've set your stall out. You want the numbers. Where else are you going to take them in terms of action?
So, and it's then, what are we doing going forward? So what are we going to measure going forward? What do you want to know about your business? Because then we can construct reports that give you that information. And then how do we maintain this going forward?
Yeah.
Because it does need to be maintained. It's something that keeps moving. It's a live piece of paper, as it were. It changes every week, every month.
Look, you know what? This is the interesting thing when people come to see me and say, "I'd like a financial plan." I go, "Great, we'll build you a financial plan." But you do realise that this financial plan will look not fundamentally, but subtly different year on year. And they go, "Why?" I said, "Well, because life changes all plans, doesn't it? Life is." I think it was Churchill or Eisenhower. They have got similar quotes on this. Planning is great, and then life gets in the way. Is just a core reality, isn't it?
And a balance sheet is effectively a snapshot.
Yeah.
It's a snapshot at a point in time, and that snapshot will change.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Thanks, Sharon. Really appreciate that. Alison, talk to me about what action you're going to take. Is there any shouting involved, or is heads good? I don't know. I mean, how would you deal with it?
I'm going to avoid the subject completely about the whole family dynamic, because I think there's people around the table far more qualified to deal with that than me. I'm gonna look at, well, first of all, I'm gonna make the assumption that business is going to pick up, because everybody I know is going mad trying to get hold of builders and carpenters and goodness knows what to catch up on all the work that they couldn't get done over the last 18 months. And you can't get hold of anybody for love nor money. So I'm going to assume that the business is going to be good. What I'd want to be doing is sitting down with them and talking about the 3 employees that they've suddenly had issues with, because they've never had this issue before. They've suddenly got to actually pay attention to the HR side. Everything's grown up very organically. Everything's, you know, very happy clappy and everybody's good mates and everybody gets on. And now all of a sudden they don't know how to deal with it because perhaps, you know, they haven't got the infrastructure in place. So I would want to go in and sit down with them and use this as a wonderful learning opportunity for them to think about the business going forwards and think about both the HR and the wellbeing strategy and how that fits with the business strategy as a whole. Not hitting them over the head with the fact that they've now got these 3 employees that are potentially they're gonna have to manage in a slightly different way to what they're used to, but using it as a learning opportunity to help encourage them that they do need a bit more robustness around the way that they manage the people in place, and help them think about what does that look like. You know, do they need a bit more hands-on from the external company? Does Billy perhaps want to go and get some HR training? Do they want to take a qualified HR person in the business, or an HR person that perhaps specializes in working with small businesses and, you know, gives so many hours a week, etc., to help them think a bit more strategically? My goodness, you know, everybody's going mad having all the DIY done. We could grow even bigger and we need to take care of this. So I would want them to look at that perspective. First of all, from the HR, get the immediate stuff in place to make sure that they know how to deal with the employees, just in case they have to go down the disciplinary route. But then I would also want them to start thinking about the wellbeing strategy as a whole. What is the pressure on the team at the moment? Do they know that the big business has struggled? Is there a lot of stress around because people are uncertain about their future? Help them start thinking about their communication strategy to the employees. Start communicating to the employees to talk about, really open, upfront and honest about what are some of the wider business issues, because some of your best solutions can come from your employee base. About, you know, do we stay on the high street? Do we move? Do we go online? You know, what do we do? And help them, you know, move from where they are into something a little bit more on purpose and a bit more strategic, because I think these 3 people just help highlight the fact that they've gone beyond their current way of working being practical, and they're beginning to get to a size now where they need to be a bit more structured. Also, again, not hitting them over the head with it, but just kind of reinforcing the fact if you don't get this right, you could actually fall foul of the legal side of things. And, you know, that's not good for you, it's not good for your reputation, it's not good for the employees, it's not good for anybody. So I'd want to start getting them thinking about that. And then the other bit that I want to look at is these 3 employees. So first of all, encouraging Billy to go and talk to the receptionist. I think there is a worry of going to talk to people because you are worried, well, what do I say? Am I going to fall foul of being seen as not being diverse and inclusive because this lady's pregnant? And actually just going and, you know, go and have a coffee somewhere, go and sit down, have a chat, find out what's going on with her, and finding out what you can actually do to help. 9 times out of 10 that can solve the problem, but people can be overly worried, I think, about what they don't know how to deal with. So that's the first one that I would, you know, just say, you know, just go and have a conversation. The Monday sickness, I'd be advising them 2 ways. You know, start looking at the stats, start looking at the patterns, having a look at what the person's putting on the sick certificate. If it's something significant, then obviously there's a discussion there around what support they need if they've got an illness. can they get to the bottom of it? Is it stress related? So is it somebody that's dreading coming in on a Monday morning and wakes up with a migraine on Monday because they're not enjoying their job? So again, that comes down to helping them through the wellbeing process and the HR process about having a good conversation. Or if it turns out that they're just, you know, a bit of a game freak and they're playing games all weekend and they're too tired to get out of bed on Monday morning, then making sure that they have the disciplinary process in place. And then the last one is the one that's a little bit more interesting, because already you probably start to see that that person's got something fundamentally underlying that is a health condition that needs some help and support. So again, just encouraging them to go and have that conversation and thinking of ideas that can help. As a secondary, I might also be encouraging them to think about how they can get people thinking about their well-being as a whole. So, you know, it's the last year and a half been incredibly stressful. So maybe doing some lunch and learns or some training, some training in place for employees, some extra help and support, some stress management, how to grow a bit more resilience. Also, I work in conjunction with a company called Cervello, and they actually do physical tests, blood, urine, things that we won't mention, which actually gives a good indication of somebody's health, gut bacteria, stress levels, also, you know, massive amounts of information. And offer that to staff, that they can also understand how their body is reacting, because very often, especially when you know, stressed people are very often in denial.
So Alison, couple of really interesting things there, and it'd be interesting to get Katie and Alex's perspective on this as well. So we've talked about tracking the financials, but we haven't talked about tracking the numbers when it comes to staff. And certainly, you know, in the work that I've done with corporate clients in the past, in conjunction with HR professionals and people who focus on well-being, there's been a trend, and Charlie, who's one of my colleagues at Cervello, he does a lot of this. There's a trend of tracking some of those underlying numbers, like absence and, you know, days off sick and what particular days have been off sick. Is there some value, do you think, in tracking some of those numbers in a more consistent, data-driven way?
Absolutely, because also when you're looking at putting any new process in place, you want to actually also be able to derive some key performance indicators, and they're the sorts of numbers that you derive those key performance indicators from. So things like absences, to see if they go down, because I think the number now is 1 in 7 people are likely to be suffering from stress-related illness. They're not likely to put that on their certificate. But, you know, if you get the right support in place, you're going to see those numbers go down. So definitely tracking. But also you want to get the managers involved, because it's not just tracking what the numbers show you, but it's also those people that you've got the opposite of absence tracking at the moment, with people being so worried that they're going to lose their jobs. You haven't got absenteeism. You've got what they call presenteeism, where people don't go off sick either because they're worried about money, or they don't want to be seen to be the person that's off sick in case they're the one that gets unemployed.
But then this, I mean, in my head, that sparks a really interesting debate, because do we then, instead of focusing on time in work, is there, particularly with flexible working now, is there more of a conversation about productivity and how we potentially perceive work being done?
You definitely want to be encouraging companies to help managers understand that it's, at the end of the day, it's how productive a person is, not how many hours they sit with their bum on a seat looking at a screen. And I've had this myself. I employed a kickstart person last month. So for the first time in my business, I've actually had a proper employee. I've employed people in corporate before where somebody else was doing all the legal and the regulatory bit, but for the first time I've had to do it all myself. And I even caught myself for the first week and a half actually wanting to phone her every 5 minutes to find out what she was doing. And then just sort of saying, no, let's go, you know, measure her on whether she actually does what you've asked her to do and how quickly she does it. And it took me about a week and a half to get there. It was really interesting.
If you got there in a week and a half, that's a lot quicker than I got there, Alison. So well done.
It's only one person.
Sorry, just because we're going through the Kickstart process for our new start at the minute. How are you getting on with that?
Brilliant. I absolutely love having Sophie. She's amazing.
Good, great stuff. And you're not phoning her every 5 minutes, are you? Just checking.
Sorry?
You're not phoning her every 5 minutes. Every 10? Great stuff. Thank you for that. Hannah Lee, talk to me about what recommendations you'd be making specifically.
I mean, the first thing I'm going to shout about is that everybody should have a will. So, to be honest, I'd probably suggest to them that the first thing they need to do is sit around that table and have that discussion about what their company they want to do.
Yeah.
Because from that will then filter through to the sort of advice and work that I would need to do.
Yeah.
So if they've got something like the shareholders agreement and the articles all sorted out, we can then discuss the wills, both in respect of the shares for the company. Powers of attorney, again, for the incapacity of a director may not be relevant, dependent on what they've agreed previously. Then it would be a more in-depth discussion with particularly David and Jean about what they want to happen on death. So with David, does he want Jean to have any interest in the company?
Yeah.
That will then influence, you know, all of the rest of the stuff throughout the will, because depending on what he says he wants to do after the discussions with the wider family, which would be necessary, I think, because if not, the problem that you're going to be looking at is a potential claim on David's death, and that's going to be that, you know, that people are going to be dissatisfied with what is been put in there, and then you've just got the contentious element of that. So if we're dealing with everything now, it saves the headache later down the line. I've already sort of touched on the power of attorney for David, whether or not a business LPA is appropriate, because if there is something in there that says that a director can just be removed if they're incapacitated, obviously there's not really a need for a business LPA, but he may well want to choose to do a personal power of attorney. Similarly, all of them could do that, whether or not that's just for health, just for finances, or whether they want to do the health one as well. I would always recommend usually having both. They kind of go hand in hand.
So just so I've got to understand, typically as a business owner, would you be recommending that they have an LPA for their business to help the fellow directors make business decisions, and one personally to deal with their personal affairs? Sorry,
I lost you there in the middle bit.
Sorry. So would you recommend that there's a business LPA for the directors who are incapacitated to make business decisions, and then a personal one for the money?
Yeah, so I would, because of the fact that, you know, with this circumstance, for instance, David might be quite happy with Jean dealing with his personal finances, but she's not involved in the company and she wouldn't necessarily want to be.
Yeah.
So then you would definitely need it for those two instances.
Would there be less of a need? Would there be, like, to give you an example, in, you know, let's take Cassie and I, or some of Raymond's clients, or Raymond, because I know that him and his wife work together. You know, if there's not that line between who defines, you know, if the directors of the business are also husband and wife, is there less of a need potentially to do that? What do you think?
Less of a need potentially, but I still think the power of attorney should be explicit as to whether or not you can manage the business assets. So it might be in your circumstance that you say, yeah, we want the power of attorney, but I would put an explicit
And the
clause
business
within there to say that it does apply to the
Okay,
business
that's
where
fair
it's
comment.
possible. Just for clarity.
Great stuff, thank you. Sharon, I know you've got to go for your 3 o'clock. So last question, we're going to do a quick round robin. Any other professionals that you'd get to support with this case?
Counselling?
Psychologist.
Yes.
All right, that's what I need. That's what I need. Have a good meeting. I'll see you soon.
See ya.
Bye. Raymond. I don't know how you're going to match that. What other professionals are you looking to get involved in supporting these clients?
Well, I would want, and this is really interesting, a family lawyer and a corporate lawyer in the same room talking, because my experience is, so I'm listening to what Emily's saying, and I'm like, but it's chicken and egg a little bit. So you actually need to have both conversations at the same time, especially when you're talking about a family-run business.
Would it be a family lawyer, or would it be, and again, Hannah-Lee and Alex, you've probably got a bit more of an insight into this than me, or would it be a mediation process in terms of, I don't know, how would it work?
No, maybe a media. I think it's interesting when Annalise said about Jean running the household finances, but not necessarily being her husband wanting her to run the business, because one of those things is that they're not the same thing, but actually they all seem to get lumped in as if they are the same thing, and they're not. And whether it's a mediation process, I think you've got to have, in many ways, got to have the legal, the professional in the room who actually can bring both sides and say, if you do this in your business, you do understand the implications for you personally. And I don't see that I don't think we ever see the connectivity between two. And of course you get the inheritance tax and all the rest of it down the line. But I do think you need to see both of those aspects at the same time in the same room, so you can actually see the dynamics come together, because you never do. We do our personal wills over here and everything else. And then as the business owner, and remembering, Chris, if we're not there, do we have a business? So it's one thing to be working with our wives, but fundamentally, if we are the ones who run the business, is there a business there if we're not there?
Yeah, and that's something you need to be conscious of as you're developing your business, in terms of building that succession plan, don't you? But that takes a lot of time. So thanks, Raymond. Katie, who else would you bring into the mix to support you with these clients?
I mean, for the sake of time, I think I've written down every kind of lawyer I can possibly imagine in all the areas of expertise, everybody on this call, and some intermediary person that's got a ton of patience.
That's going to be a busy meeting room. Alison, who else would you get involved?
I think I've covered it all, to be honest.
Yeah. Cool. All right. No worries. Thank you. Annalise, anybody else that you'd want to get involved?
I mean, the only other person that's not been mentioned I might bring in is somebody to potentially confirm capacity, Frank.
Yeah.
Depending what he's like.
Yeah.
Might be that it's not necessary, but.
Yeah, just somebody who can give us that professional opinion makes sense.
He already knows he's losing his memory. Doesn't need anyone to tell him.
Yeah, but it might be useful. Alex, anybody else?
I think the only other person that I've sort of jotted down was maybe occupational health.
Yeah.
But yeah, then obviously sort of a range of sort of lawyers in the different practice areas, mediator, HR professional, etc.
Cool. Kevin, anybody else you think would be useful?
No, I think, to be honest with you, Chris, we've covered it completely. Done 100%. Well.
And then the last question, and clearly the most important one, is: did anybody get the reference in the 80s reference in the case study?
The Prince, When Doves Cry.
So contained in the case study, and clearly I've got too much time on my hands, is the NME's 20 greatest hits of the 80s, and they're all in there. It was a bit of a tough one, and I couldn't get Prince in because everybody knows, like, sort of When Doves Cry is way too easy. But thank you for getting involved. thank you for, again, your expertise, and I'll see you next time on Inner Circle. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone,
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Take care.